In January 2004, a quiet Colorado neighborhood became the center of one of the most disturbing unsolved murder cases in modern American history. The crime wasn't loud or chaotic. Instead, it was silent, methodical, and chillingly calculated. This is the story of Robert Alkite and the unidentified man who moved into his home, lived alongside him, and then took his life. Robert Alkite was a 53-year-old retired software engineer living in Aurora, Colorado. After a successful career, he was financially comfortable and lived a structured, predictable life. Friends described him as intelligent, private, and exceptionally cautious. He spent his retirement managing his investments, traveling, and maintaining his townhouse. In late 2003, Al decided to rent out a spare room. It was a decision made partly for a little extra income and partly for some company, but this simple act of trust would ultimately cost him his life. Responding to Al's rental ad was a man who introduced himself as Robert Cooper. He claimed to be from North Carolina and said he worked in construction. He was polite, well-spoken, and seemed perfectly normal. He provided references, documentation, and what appeared to be a legitimate background check. Al, a man who prided himself on his meticulous nature, felt comfortable enough to rent him the room. What he couldn't have known was that everything about Robert Cooper was a lie. In the weeks that followed, neighbors noticed some odd things. About the new tenant, he was reclusive and rarely engaged in conversation. He was often seen wearing gloves, even when it wasn't cold. Most unnervingly, he seemed intensely focused on Al's daily routines, watching his every move. At the time, none of this seemed alarming enough to report, but in hindsight, these small details painted the picture of a predator studying his prey. On January 22, 2004, Al failed to show up for a scheduled meeting. This was completely out of character. A friend, worried by his absence, went to his townhouse. Something felt immediately wrong. The police were called to perform a welfare check. When officers entered the home, they made a horrifying discovery. Alkite was found deceased inside. The crime scene was unlike anything the seasoned investigators had ever encountered. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. Nothing of value had been stolen, ruling out a simple robbery. The evidence suggested the attack had been planned and carried out with terrifying control, possibly over an extended period, and the tenant, the man known as Robert Cooper, had vanished without a trace. Investigators quickly realized that the killer had likely lived with Al just long enough to learn everything about him, his daily schedule, his habits, and the layout of his home. This wasn't a random act of violence or a crime of passion. The motive appeared to be something far more sinister, which immediately set off alarms. As the police began their search for the mysterious tenant, they made a disturbing discovery. The man known as Robert Cooper did not exist. The social security number he provided was stolen. His references were fabricated. His entire employment history was a complete fiction. This wasn't just a fake name. It was a carefully constructed identity designed to fool even a cautious man like Alkite. Investigators now believe the suspect had used multiple aliases across several states, possibly for years, perfecting his craft of deception. But despite his meticulous planning, the killer made one critical mistake. In the apartment, police recovered crucial evidence: the suspect's DNA and a partial fingerprint. They also found information that linked him to previous rental-related fraud, suggesting this was part of a larger pattern of behavior. This physical evidence was immediately entered into national databases, including CODIS, but there was no match. The killer was a ghost in the system. The FBI was called in to assist with the investigation. Their behavioral analysis unit created an extensive profile of the suspect. They concluded he was likely highly intelligent, incredibly organized, and unnervingly patient. He was a master of deception, comfortable with exerting total control over others. The FBI didn't believe this was a crime of rage. Instead, they theorized the motive may have been a desire for power, dominance, or some form of dark psychological satisfaction. As the investigation broadened, authorities began to identify similar behaviors reported in other rental situations across the country. While no other crimes have been definitively linked to Alkite's killer, the unsettling possibility remains that his murder was not an isolated incident. There could be other victims who were defrauded, or worse. In an unusual step, investigators decided to go public with a wealth of information. They released a 3D composite image of the suspect, created from witness descriptions. They shared details of the FBI's behavioral profile and issued a nationwide warning to landlords, urging them to be vigilant. They hoped that someone, somewhere, would recognize the face or the pattern of behavior. But even with this massive public appeal, the suspect was never identified. Today, nearly 2 decades later, the murder of Alkite remains unsolved. The man responsible has never been named. His DNA and fingerprint are still in the system, waiting for a match that has never come. The case is still open. And investigators believe it's possible the killer is still alive, moving from state to state under new false identities, perhaps looking for his next victim. Alkite was a man who believed he had carefully vetted the person he let into his home. Instead, he unknowingly opened his door to a methodical predator who had created a fictional life for the sole purpose of gaining his trust. Years have passed, but the killer remains a shadow, a man with a face, a profile, and DNA, but no name. Thank you for watching. If you found this case as fascinating as we did, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories, always covered with care and accuracy. We'll see you in the next one.